Hello, I'm Rick Watson of Eagle West Group, and you're listening to one of our series in Client Stories. Today I'm speaking with Dr. Alfonso Barba about his compelling and unique story of getting into medical school. As a student, Dr. Barba also became one of the few people who actually chose which students got accepted. This behind-the-scenes perspective will be invaluable to anyone who's considering a career in medicine. Dr. Barba, please begin by telling us a little bit about your history and how you became a doctor.
My parents both came from Mexico. They immigrated over here. We grew up speaking Spanish in the household, and when we got old enough and we were able to kind of like venture out, with the kids on the block, that's where we learned English. We did well in high school, got in to UCLA, and we were applying for financial aid, and my dad made just enough money to not really qualify for much, but it was enough to pay for tuition. We had to come up with books and fees, so we took part-time jobs and we worked there. When I started at UCLA, I wanted to sign up for pre-med classes, and the counselor pretty much went out of her way to discourage me from signing up for those classes because, she said that you would be one of 5,000 people applying for what was then about 120 seats in the School of Medicine. So that was pretty discouraging, but I figured UCLA was just not going to be the school for me. I was not going to become a doctor there, and I figured, okay, if it's true that maybe I should think about going into business, which was my alternative. As the summer is going by, I'm thinking, I really don't want to be a business major. I really want to be a doctor. It was just something inside me that would not let me give up that dream. So I enroll in the summer at East LA College, thinking that I'm going to take business classes. And I had them all picked out, and I was standing in line for the computer classes. And as I walk up to the person, out of my mouth does not come out Business 101. I said, I want to take Biology 101. So instantly I changed my courses to Bio 101 and Physics 101. Again, the requirements for pre-med. And so about a month into being at East LA College, I realized that Cal State LA had not yet started their school, and I figured, this is a competitive environment. If it looks like I left UCLA and then went to a junior college, that might look bad. So I actually drove over there. So I walk in, and there's this big office on the top floor there of the administration building. And so I walk in, and I said, ma'am, I want to get admitted to Cal State LA, but this is the week of enrollment for classes, and if I go through your admissions process, it's going to take a quarter before I get in. So I brought my transcripts, and here's my application. I think I'm going to be okay in your school. Will you just let me in? And the lady looks at me, and it's like 4:45, in the afternoon on a Friday, and she goes, hang on. And so she goes in the back, and I look in through the office door, and there's this guy sitting at this big desk, and he looks up through his desk. He looks at me. He looks at the paperwork, and he kind of waves me into his office a little bit, and he says, so you want to come to Cal State LA? And I said, yeah, I do. And he says, okay, we'll admit you. And he just stamps it admissions, and he gives me a couple of these key cards that you would need to go get your classes. And so that's how I got accepted to Cal State LA. I just walked in with a student's copy of my transcripts. And while I'm at Cal State LA, I meet other students, like-minded students like me, who wanted to become doctors. But now, of course, we're at Cal State LA. We are at a school that does not have the prestige of a USC or a UCLA. But we figured, we wanted to go to medical school. We knew we could do it. We just had to figure out how to do it. What we all knew at the time was that going to those competitive schools, those big schools, was just not the place for us. We knew we were not going to do well there. So while we were putting our heads together trying to figure out how to solve this common problem that we had, I was in the lobby of the biology building, and I'm trying to buy myself a soda pop. And I dropped the coin, and on the floor is this magazine. It's this little, and it was open to an article that had been dropped there about a guy named Frank Mesa, who was a Hispanic student just like I was, who had just graduated, and he was practicing medicine here in East LA. And the picture is of him, and he's wearing shorts and a T-shirt. And I'm thinking, this guy's just like me. This is the guy I need to talk to. And as it turns out, he actually had a practice at the East LA clinic. So I went over, again, the same way I approached the dean. So I just went over and I actually got an appointment with him, and I shook his hand. I said, look, my name is Alfonso Barba. I'm the newly elected president of our student health group. We wanted to know if you can come and talk to us because we need some motivation, and we want to know what your story is and see if we can kind of emulate what you did. And he says, yeah, sure. He basically gave us a blueprint of what we needed to do to get into medical school, and that was you had to get great grades and you had to do well on that standardized exam. But you also had to show that you had a real passion for medicine. You had to show the people on the admissions committee that your idea of a physician did not come from TV. It didn't come from a magazine article or some other fantasy. That you really understood what it was you were going to get into. And the best way to do that was to show that you were working alongside physicians or that you did some sort of leadership work, that you were in fact able to take command of a situation, which is what physicians have to do. That had not been so emphasized. And so we followed his blueprint for 4 years, recruited more students, and just did more work with that. And in the end, I wound up applying, and I got into every medical school I applied to, including and I went to UCSF. In my second year, I applied for being on the admissions committee, and so they interviewed me and asked, well, why do you think you would be a good representative to be on our admissions committee? How do we know you know how to pick them? And my answer was, well, I think what I'll contribute is a perspective that you don't have. You know how to pick the big research guy who can probably win a Nobel Prize in the future. That's what you guys do well. But you don't do well choosing equally qualified, hardworking people who are going to go back to the Hispanic community, which has been neglected. And so I said, I can pick out that guy who's going to go back to the community and not just use your degree for his own personal gain. And they bought it. So they allowed me to be one of 20 people to pick the entering class.
So tell me sort of how they make that decision. Medical school 101, right?
What they do first is they teach you what's in common for a good medical student. They'll tell you what the minimum number is for your MCAT score. They'll tell you what the minimum GPA is. They tell you, look, if we pick people with these numbers or less, their failure rate goes up logarithmically. They said, we don't always know who's going to do well, but we can tell you that if you choose people with below this standard, they're not going to graduate, and you will have wasted a seat.
So can you give me just the rough numbers? In the medical school admissions, you got X number of people, and then the first two cuts were this, and that dropped the number to this. And
5,000 to 800. Here's what they do. They look at your GPA, and they look at your MCAT score. Then they read your letters of recommendation, and they give them a score from 0 to 2. So you get a 0, a 1, or a 2. Based on how the letters are written. And they're looking for certain key words in those letters. They want letters of recommendation that literally say, you walk on water. Then they'll look at your extracurricular activities. And they will also look at the school you went to. So fortunately for me, Cal State LA had done well enough that you were given as many points on the application for going to Cal State LA as you did for going to USC or UCLA. It's grade, MCAT, letters of recommendation, the school you went to. They were assigned a point system, and you had to get the maximum number of points you can get, I think, was 18. And to get an interview, you had to get at least 14.
So you get it down to the point. So now it gets down to 800 applications.
At that point, what we say is that if all 800 of those students had a position in medical school, we know that if you have these numbers, you will graduate.
How do they sort through the 800 then?
Well, now with the 800, what you do is you interview them. When you're done interviewing with them, then you take your impression and you speak to the other guy who interviewed him, and then the two of you decide how hard you're going to fight for the candidate that you interview. What you want to do as the candidate is to really capture the imagination of the guy who's interviewing you, so that the guy is literally screaming at the top of his lungs that you ought to be accepted to the school.
Didn't you say that interviewing earlier was a tremendous advantage?
Yeah, interviewing early in the season is a great advantage because all of the new people on the committee don't know they don't have anything to compare anything to. So consequently, if you interview early and you impress them early, you're the guy that makes the impression. And people who submit their applications late, by the time they get interviewed, the same people on these committees will be literally saying, okay, I've heard this before. I've heard this story before. It's no longer impressive. So, when you see that they're leaning towards research, well, then you put some research under your belt. When you see that they're leaning, more towards community service, well, you put your emphasis on that. When you see that they're leaning more towards the business end of it because, physicians notoriously don't make good business decisions, then you can see them pushing in that direction. But from those 50, you had to choose 8 to 10 that you were going to interview, okay? And of those 8 to 10, you were going to fight for about 5 or 6 of them.
15 years ago, if you could tell yourself,
right.
give yourself some advice in the
yes.
financial world, what would
yes.
you tell yourself?
Okay, here's what I would tell myself is the following. From the very first day I started working, you really should put aside money for retirement, number one. And number two, as smart as you think you are, you really need a good financial advisor. You really do, and if you don't know how to read a prospectus, you got to find somebody who can.
Dr. Barba, thank you so much for sharing your story of getting into medical school, as well as your valuable insight on medical school admissions process. I'm Rick Watson of Eagle West, and you've been listening to our Client Stories with Dr. Alfonso Barba. Thanks again.